Hello and welcome to BioBiz Buzz. I'm your host, Mike Ward, and I'm the Global Head of Life Sciences and Healthcare Thought Leadership at Clarivate, which is a multinational provider of data, insights, and intelligence that helps healthcare companies accelerate their innovation. In this episode, we're going to look at one of the most urgent issues in modern medicine, the desperate need for non-addictive pain treatments. With opioid addiction and overdose rates still at crisis levels, millions living with chronic and neuropathic pain are left with actually few truly safe options. My guest today is Per von Mentzer. He's the CEO of PharmNovo, which is a Swedish biotech company that's pioneering a new class of pain medicines, a class that promise powerful relief without the risks of addiction or sedation. So what I intend to do over the next 20 minutes or so is explore the science behind their lead candidate, PN6047, the challenges of developing safer painkillers, and also what the future actually holds for pain management. So thanks for joining me, Per.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to join you.
So as a kickoff, to understand the challenge that I just outlined, can you tell our listeners why there's such an urgent need for non-addictive alternatives to opioids?
Yeah, I think that the very well-known opioid crisis has shown us the risks and terrible consequences that can come out of relying on painkillers that are addictive. And if we take focus on chronic pain typically cannot be treated safe and effective by using conventional opioids, for example. And there is simply not enough alternatives using other kind of drugs for chronic pain states. And that basically means that there is a huge gap here. So there is a huge unmet medical need for patients suffering from chronic pain. And we particularly focus on neuropathic pain, which is a part of that. So safe and effective treatments are desperately needed.
So neuropathic pain, can you explain actually what neuropathic pain is and actually why is it so challenging to treat?
Neuropathic pain is caused by damage to the nervous system, and it can actually result from a large number of different conditions. So typically, diabetes patients develop quite commonly neuropathic pain. The same goes for patients that get chemotherapy. It can be caused by injury and infectious diseases such as shingles, for example. And neuropathic pain is usually quite persistent and often very severe. And patients typically have this pain for a very long period because there are really no truly effective treatments. Current treatments that are used and recommended are proconvulsant medicines as well as antidepressants, and they are both only partially effective in some patients. You usually say that 20-30% of patients respond to some extent to these treatments, and they are both associated with quite severe side effects. So again, there is a big gap here.
So what is PharmNovo sort of doing to meet this challenge? What's your, mission in the field of pain management?
PharmNovo is developing novel solutions and novel therapies for chronic pain and particularly neuropathic pain. And our mission is really to bring both safe, effective, and sustainable treatments to patients without risk of addiction or severe side effects that come with, for example, traditional opioids, but also with the other antidepressants and epileptics. The lead candidate, you mentioned that PN6047, we call it, is a very, very selective delta-opioid receptor agonist designed to meet this need.
So is it the targeting of delta-opioid receptor that sort of makes your approach to pain treatment different from, say, for example, the traditional opioids?
Yeah, that's correct. There are three distinct opioid receptors, the delta, the mu, and the kappa. And conventional opioids are mainly targeting the mu receptor. And the mu receptor is the one which is responsible for a lot of the issues that we talk about. So there you have abuse potential, which leads to addiction, And overdose of morphine, for example, or any of the other analogs can also cause then respiratory depression, which is, of course, fatal. The delta receptor is quite unique in the sense that activating that, you get fantastic pain relief in chronic pain states. It doesn't work very well for acute pain. And so far, we have demonstrated that it's very safe and tolerable both in animals and in humans. So it's a very interesting path towards a potential safe and effective treatment for these patients.
Okay, let's take a deeper dive there then. So, can you tell me how P6047 actually works? I mean, what research results or clinical trial results have you achieved so far?
As I said, PN6047 is very selective. It's actually more than 100,000-fold selective on the delta receptor. And that means that it basically does not touch at all or activate the mu receptor. It's also very selective for the other, the kappa receptor, but that's of less interest. And on top of that, we have developed something we call bias signaling. So when we actually activate the receptor, we also predominantly signal through the G protein route, and that's maybe a bit too scientific, but that means that we get a lot of the positive effects that we want, and we avoid things that we don't want to see, such as tolerance. So not only is it effective in reducing chronic pain and neuropathic pain, but it's also doing that over time without having to increase the doses. So there's no tolerance buildup seen so far in up to 3 weeks of treatments in animals. So that's quite exciting.
Right. So, we've talked about the opioid crisis, and yet pain management, particularly, chronic pain management there's a huge burden of disease there. How are the regulators looking at next generation pain management? I mean, what does the competitive landscape look like? And are there also others doing something similar to you?
First of all, I would like to touch on the specifics of what we are doing, because there were big pharma attempts in this field way back in time. And we are actually based on a spin-out from AstraZeneca originally. So developing delta-opioid receptor agonists, as we see it, has been a missed opportunity that some large pharma companies were into, but then abandoned when they abandoned CNS as a strategic focus. We are definitely more advanced and ahead of other companies or projects in our field. So we do have a first-in-class potential. But what I would like to say on your question is that there are actually numerous different attempts to develop non-addictive and alternative treatments. So what I can see is that in the whole ecosystem, there will be a different kind of non-addictive treatments coming to market in the future. There's quite a buzz, and I would say that the interest for developing pain treatments is coming back strongly. We can see that from both other companies in the field doing similar things to us, but with different modes of actions, but also industry showing more and more interest for solving this problem, because it is a huge societal problem. We have maybe 20 to 30% of the adult population suffering from chronic pain sometime in their life, which is massive, and there is no safe and effective treatment available today.
Right. So you mentioned just there that you're in the vanguard of developing these new treatments. Can you go a little deeper and explain exactly where you are with PN6047, and also what you anticipate the next steps in that development timeline that we can expect to see?
Absolutely. Today we are a clinical stage development company. We finalized our phase 1, which is of course in healthy volunteers. Final results by Q2 last year, actually. And the results were very promising, fully safe and tolerable, up to exposure levels that we truly can predict to be effective in humans. And we are now well advanced in the preparations for phase 2A, which is then the proof of concept study ahead of us. And we now target to be able to start that first proof of concept study in neuropathic pain, and actually in patients with a very specific profile of symptoms, which we call allodynia, which is hypersensitivity in the skin, by early next year. And we have very advanced preparations already in place. We are targeting to basically hand in our clinical trial application next week. So that's where we are in terms of development. And this means that we could possibly have headline results. And we do believe that we will see effect by mid-2027. So it's not too far away where we could actually have a readout on also the efficacy in patients.
And when you say next week, you mean towards the end of June 2025?
Yes.
Yeah. And is that with the FDA or other regulatory agencies?
That's a good question. We did have interaction with the FDA in January this year, but that was to align our study plans with the FDA, which we believe is important, and to also prepare for opening an IND. But we do not plan to make the first proof of concept studies in the US. That first study in neuropathic pain patients will be done in 3 European countries. But that means, of course, we did have a very interesting interaction with FDA and got it well aligned. So we incorporated a few comments from that meeting into the study protocol. And it feels quite good to have that done before we actually go into the regulatory interaction in Europe. So we carry that with us, which is quite positive.
So I'm sort of just thinking, so given the sort of the dark cloud historically that has been over the treatment of pain, who are the stakeholders that you're going to have to convince that your approach with a drug like PN6047 is going to be the right and safe one for treating neuropathic pain?
Yeah, I think you have a very interesting question here because, of course, the challenge is that there are very many stakeholders around this question. And we just touched regulators. We do think that regulators, after the meeting we had with FDA, are quite aware of the potential that we have with our delta-opioid receptor agonist. And there is one thing when we talk about regulators and the view of FDA on this, which is quite interesting. There is actually a very selective kappa agonist, so the third receptor, which is extremely selective as well. And that one has been approved. It's a drug called Korsuva, has been approved a few years ago without any black box warnings, any restrictions in terms of the label. So that demonstrates and validates that FDA is typically data-driven and that there is an understanding for that if you don't touch the mu receptor, which is the case for that drug as well, you could be free of the risk of addiction and all those problems. So that's quite interesting. So I don't think that regulators will be that difficult actually to get on board. I would say industry is also getting more and more aware of these opportunities. And we do have a dialogue with a number of pharma companies, some actually under CDA as well. And there is a growing interest. But of course, they predominantly want to see efficacy data as well. And I think they understand quite well the safety profile of this drug candidate, but definitely want to see that it also works as well in humans as we have demonstrated in animals. But that's only two stakeholders. We have, of course, all the other ones. We have the patients, we have the clinicians, we have the payers and the reimbursement system and all that. I think that if we're not going to go through all of these in detail, I think probably one of the critical ones, and it comes a bit later probably in the process from our point of view, is clinicians, because they have to be convinced that they can trust a new treatment and recommend that to these patients that have been suffering for decades from the fact that there is no safe and effective treatment available today, and they have been like test animals basically for various treatments. So clinicians will be, I would say, one of the absolutely most important stakeholder to get on board and to create trust in them.
Yeah, but like given the fact that, the sort of the problems associated with the addictive opioids that have been used in the past for pain relief, and we both mentioned the sort of the societal problems that have been associated with that, what sort of messaging are you going to provide to reassure patients and their families that we're not going to go back to what's happened in the past? Because I could imagine that that's probably quite a challenging message to deliver.
Yes, indeed. And I think that's been one of the communication challenges so far, that we have an opioid, although it's completely different to conventional opioids. And it's so selective that we can demonstrate that it doesn't act on the receptors that create problems. But of course, just the word in itself creates some reactions in most people's minds, of course.
Yeah.
But I think that we have started, and we're actually driving some campaigns ourselves now on LinkedIn to educate people. And we're trying to use a mantra right now, which is not all opioids are the same.
Yeah.
And that is kind of intriguing, of course, that we have to be classified as an opioid because we touch an opioid receptor, but we are completely different to the conventional ones. And so we are not walking out there and pretend that we are not an opioid, but we are a different. Not all opioids are the same. That's a fact.
Yeah. So looking ahead, how do you sort of see the landscape, therefore, of pain management evolving, say, for example, over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that there is a lot of hope because there are many different new therapies being developed. They typically all focus on being non-addictive. A bit intriguing here is of course that so far most of them claim that they are non-opioids because they actually are different mode of actions. But I think the proper way to go forward is to talk about non-addictive, and that's what we are as well. But there's definitely a lot of hope when we look ahead. And I think that there is a need for many different kind of therapies to be developed that are safe and effective. We can't believe that just one mode of action will solve everything. We see preclinically great potential for PN6047 in neuropathic pain, but also in, for example, migraine and in, intriguingly enough, opioid withdrawal syndrome. And that came to my mind now. I kind of want to mention that as well. And that links back to the regulatory discussion. We've been running a preclinical program together with 2 top universities in the US, funded by NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, who recognized some years ago the potential for a delta-opioid receptor agonist to possibly be helpful in treating patients that are suffering from opioid withdrawal syndrome. And that is, of course, quite intriguing that we think about using one type of opioid to treat withdrawal from another type, the conventional.
That is interesting.
And what is really exciting here, and it's not so surprising, is that the key symptoms for these patients is pain and anxiety. And we have, for PN6047, over the years demonstrated very good relief and effect on both these, of course, both pain and anxiety. So very exciting.
Yeah. So, Per, I think that optimistic message is probably an appropriate place to close off this episode. I mean, it's clearly an important medical need that you're tackling, and it also sounds like you've got a pretty busy year or two in front of you. So, thanks very much for sharing PharmNovo's approach and also your thoughts and insights on what's happening in page management. I wish you well, and I'll be following your progress very, very closely. So thanks very much for taking time with us today.
Thank you, Mike. It has been a pleasure.
Yeah, and also like to thank the audience for tuning into this broadcast. We're obviously curious of actually how you feel about the conversation. So if you've got any sort of comments that you would like to send, you can put it into our biobizbuzz.com website. You can sort of communicate there. And also, if you actually want to stay tuned for more editions of BioBiz Buzz, follow our LinkedIn page or subscribe to biobizbuzz.com, where we'll be posting alerts for future episodes, where again we're going to be looking at sort of some of the big challenges that face the industry and identify some of the individuals who are providing innovative solutions that will eventually benefit us all. So in closing, I'd like to thank Per again for joining me. I'm Mike Ward. I hope you will join me for the next episode of BioBiz Buzz. Goodbye.